Hello, everyone. My name is Solome Tibabu. I'm the host of the Going Digital Behavioral Health Tech Conference, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Misha and Harsha of Ribbon Health. Welcome. How are you two?
Well,
Hello. We're doing really well. Excited to have this conversation today.
thank you
Awesome.
for having us.
So, Misha, how about if you could share a little bit about what is Ribbon Health for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Ribbon, we are a provider data company. Our whole goal is to drive every care decision to be high quality, cost effective, and convenient. And the way we do this is we make sure that the information on doctors, on facilities is all up to date, that we have information on what plans they accept, and overall granular information in terms of how they specialize, demographic details that help really drive patients towards the right type of care. So we are a piece of back-end infrastructure. We deliver our data via an API and really partner across the healthcare industry. And our goal is really to drive that mission forward and to help our partners do the same.
That is certainly an important issue right now. Harsha, can you talk a little bit about what this new work around behavioral health might be?
Yeah, definitely. So we're launching a product that we're really excited about. It's called Provider Focus Areas. And the idea is to surface information about what kind of care clinicians provide. So like what treatments do they offer? What conditions do they see? The types of patients that make up their practice, all so that patients can search for the kind of care that they need. And like we built this because we know there's like a very yawning chasm between a provider's like academic taxonomy, like psychiatrist, which we find to be like extremely broad and often out of date, and the information that patients like you and me need to find the care that they need. So like, what does the provider do? Can they help me with the thing that I'm struggling with? Do they see patients like me, of my age, of my gender a lot? And I should say, like, we aren't just launching this in behavioral health, but we're particularly excited about what it can mean for the behavioral health space.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about how it all works, but what made you decide to pursue the new offering in behavioral health?
Yeah, so I think behavioral health in particular, I think, has been perhaps like unfairly isolated from like traditional, like quote unquote traditional medicine, and like traditional healthcare, like sort of everything from like the forehead up. So I think there's like maybe a bigger gap in this space in particular than in other parts of the industry in terms of like the difference between like what information is available and the kinds of like care that the kinds of information that patients are really looking for to find care.
And if I can maybe add in something here too, I think when we first started out as a company, our whole goal was to just get the fundamentals right. Like, can we know where a provider is actually practicing? If I log into my insurance company's portal and I'm looking for a doctor, will the address be correct? And will I not be sent into like a wild goose chase to actually find that provider? So that was like the first piece. And then as we started to hear more about the pain points and the needs, then it started to move into more of now we need to know who's in network. Now I need to know someone who speaks the same language as me. Now I need to know someone who's like skilled in the things I need. And so that nugget around being skilled in the things I need was so critical. And we've seen it like we've seen it so much within the behavioral health space of somebody who understands not only how to treat depression, but how to treat grief tied to depression, or grief because I am female and I went through certain life stages that are tied to my grief, and being able to kind of give that more tangible piece of information so that you can make the right decision for you. I think that's a lot of how the evolution of how we started off as just have to know addresses in an accurate way to make a decision, all the way to now like okay, I need to know how I go to someone who really understands what I'm going through and make that kind of speed to care be a lot faster and a lot more personalized and a lot more thoughtful. And so that's where some of that kind of evolution has come into play for us.
Yeah, I think Misha, you describe it so beautifully, I have to say. I think it's an especially good question. Maybe there's a question beneath it, Salome. For me, my official title is provider performance, and it's shouldn't you be off measuring readmission rates or something? And that's kind of what people think of when they hear quality measurement provider performance. But I actually think, and I'm lucky, I should say, that a CEO and our head of product lets me run with these kinds of ideas. That this product is very central to quality. When it comes to finding the right provider for a patient, especially in behavioral health, like Misha was saying, fit is quality. And so does the provider treat severe depression, or do they primarily focus on milder depression? Do they have experience in the intersection between anxiety disorders like OCD and depression? Do they see patients my age? So I should, don't get me wrong. I think that those traditional quality metrics are really important too. But sometimes I think we as an industry can skip steps. And in this case, we should start with making sure there's a really good functional fit between the patient's care need and the provider, and then kind of go on to some of the fancier stuff.
Oh, I love that. Fit is quality. Absolutely.
Fit is quality.
Yeah.
The big part of it, at least.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You've alluded to some examples already, but can you expand on a few more of use cases of how it works?
Yeah. I think within this context, a lot of our focus has been on getting the patient to the right care. And we're flexible in terms of how they do that and who's helping them do that. So whether that is a patient on a consumer-facing website trying to find a provider that's right for them, or if it is a care navigator and a referral coordinator trying to connect from a provider or from a patient who's seen a PCP recently to now go to see a behavioral health provider in some way, and that referral coordinator having the right information at their fingertips to make that suggestion. Or if it might be in the stance of, you may be a platform that is physician facing or provider facing and trying to onboard them and streamline the information that they need to provide so it makes it faster for them to onboard onto the platform, and already has information in terms of their clinical focus listed. So you can start to standardize and keep this in a flexible way. So it's a number of, I think I describe these examples to say that while we are a back end piece of infrastructure, and while we are a data company, we're very much first and foremost thinking about the who at the end of the tunnel, and then, or the who at the end of the, not even the tunnel, the who at the end of the care journey, and then designing our product in a flexible way to plug into all those different touch points. And so you may be and so for many of our partners, they may have the same data flowing into all three of those examples. They may have a patient-facing search experience. They may have a referral coordinator team or a case management team who is actually helping for more complex scenarios, or they may have a platform that they're also feeding to physicians and they want to help bring that data in at scale. So we're kind of flexible to sit across all three of those, either as independent areas or as one combined platform. Really, it's just around that kind of finding the right fit, finding that so that patients feel trust in the system and feel trust in going to the care because they feel like someone cared for them and took their consideration, their needs into consideration when starting to make that connection.
Wow, this sounds great. Harsha, can you talk more specifically about how this product works? What's going on behind the scenes exactly?
Yeah, so I'm excited to be at Ribbon, where we have some great data scientists, some really good insight into consumer behavior, and also some valuable clinician input. And at this point, I'll kind of shout out to Dr. Stena Joe on our team, who's been instrumental. But I think that combination, I'm not the first person to realize, I think that combination is just very powerful. For us, of course, it starts with data. So we have a claims data set that leads the industry in like depth and breadth, and we're constantly considering new data sources to augment this. There's a lot of richness in this data about like what doctors do, but that information is extremely granular. And so what we're doing is we're bringing some of the latest data techniques. We're using machine learning and clustering algorithms to identify underlying patterns that like contextualize and summarize that granularity, all those like detailed diagnosis codes and procedure codes in a way that's like not really possible with more traditional techniques. Like what's a example? That's going to get a little like jargony after a while. I think a good example is like perhaps like drawing out the nuances that we were talking about earlier in the interconnecting worlds between anxiety and depression in a way that's like useful and intuitive for patients. And really in a way that maybe like the ICD codes, like the DSM taxonomies, whatever, like don't directly enable. So we can find doctors that specifically see a lot of OCD, or we can find doctors that tackle that intersection between anxiety and depression more broadly, or we can find doctors that deal with the interconnections between like cognitive decline at the end of life and depression, for example. And once we've like surfaced those clusters, then we can like layer on top and curate labels that that emerge from the data to make sure that we have like easily searchable tags. So making sure that the word like addiction shows up next to substance abuse disorders. So that's sort of like in a nutshell how our product works.
What are the biggest challenges with provider data for payers, individuals, providers, patients?
Yeah. I think the first way to think about this is just overall, like keeping the data around how you define a provider is accurate has been challenging across the industry. Whether that's because if we take like we step backwards again and we think about like foundationally, where is a provider practicing? Which of the 10 addresses that they actually have listed in their profile that might be living in a health plan directory one place, within the NPAS website another place, within a like consumer facing platform another place. There's just a lot of changes and updates that is administrative burden that a provider hasn't taken on. And so that, and frankly, like shouldn't necessarily be where they're spending their time. So there's that first element of like getting their details right that's been really challenging, which has then led to a lot of upstream and downstream implications. For a payer, it'll be something like, do we actually know who's in our networks? And do we have enough people, enough types of providers that treat enough of the actual underlying conditions and needs of our patients to design a network that is high quality on the provider side, or on the payer side. On the provider side, it is, do I have, like, I may have my Rolodex of information, or I may have my own like networks that I have built up in terms of other specialists or places to refer, but that's an incomplete maybe part of the story and may not always be the right answer for my patient for where I send them. And so how do I easily access the right information for them? And on the patient side, ultimately, it's like, do you have, like, if you don't know where someone is and what they practice and what they speak your language and understand your cultural background, like, do you have the right, this kind of goes back to trust and confidence. Like, do you have the right trust and confidence and the right fit for you? And I think this becomes especially important within behavioral health. And I'll have like Harsha kind of elaborate a little bit more in terms of like what this means like in the meat, but especially important here because so much of healthcare in this country is still guided by word of mouth, and it's guided by referrals and friends and family and who you ask. And this is a part where we are thankfully at a point where people are spending a lot more open about talking about getting this type of care. But for the longest time, this was not something that was discussed. And so to go and get referrals or go and ask word of mouth of who to go and how to go to, like that would reveal something very personal about you. It's a little bit different than asking for, hey, do you have like a orthopedic that I can see? Do you have an OB-GYN that you like? That was a little bit easier. But this is a little bit like, I am dealing with a very specific set of mental health problems, and I'm not comfortable asking for help. And that's like, I think where this all kind of comes down to, of that how do you kind of give the building blocks to make that decision without when we're at a time where we're still kind of getting comfortable with having that kind of care. So Alex said that's a little bit of like the way that we've started to think about it. But I know Harsha, you've been really thinking about this from a much more like granular, like why is this data missing here? And so
yeah, I mean, I think I think like what you raise is very powerful, which is like the stigma that's associated with mental health is a barrier, and so like some of the like tools then become more important because you can't rely as readily on word of mouth. Is lots of like very good point. I think maybe Salome, I might be like preaching to the choir a little bit here, but the payer and provider like industry has some catching up to do maybe in like taking behavioral health seriously. And I think the pandemic actually highlighted this quite strongly. Everything from building more granular like treatment codes. So why are all kinds of therapy just like under one code? Like that's not very helpful. To like addressing like supply shortages in like the number of providers, to like changing medical policies at payers to like expand what kinds of care can be reimbursed. These are like, I think, major challenges in the infrastructure. And I'd love to talk about like where the industry is going. Maybe that's a later question. But, I think another dimension that makes this challenging is that as like behavioral health and like somatic health, I guess, right, like our body health like starts to blur a little bit, it's going to become more important to contextualize what kinds of care your like quote unquote traditional like medicine doctors provide in the sense of behavioral health. And so like, does the primary care clinic that I go to have a behavioral health offering, right? And like, can the behavioral health provider like help me with an aspect of like, if it's like the connection between my knee pain and my anxiety or whatever, right? And so I think like those connections, as the industry catches up to the fact that our heads and our bodies are connected, like that the data infrastructure may catch up as well.
I mean, this seems like it should resonate with a lot of folks. What have you heard so far in terms of feedback?
I think there's just a lot of hunger for this type of information out there. I think there is, and especially now kind of coming out of the pandemic, this has been highlighted as a way that those who are at home trying to seek care on their own, those who are the emergence or the continued emergence of the virtual behavioral health providers and being able to kind of bridge that gap. I think we've really just heard that this more granular level of information is so helpful in being able to deliver that care. And especially to go back to what I shared before, like especially where patients are so often left on their own and just not really sure where to go. And so far, like in terms of like directionally, we've heard really positive feedback, but we also recognize that like, as Harsha said, like the industry is there's a lot still that we need to do to unlock and democratize this data. And so we have a deep desire to learn together. Like we're not here today to say that we have the answers and we need everyone to now just like consume our answers. We're here today to say that we would like to play a role in solving this problem and do it together and have the fundamental building blocks of really strong provider directory, a best-in-class data science team, a team that just cares about this problem more generally, that wants to kind of come to yours and learn from the experts. So a lot of those who are probably going to be watching this or who are at this conference, like, this space much better than we do. And so we want to like be, we want to kind of be like work together and co-developed and learn and continue to refine. And we're excited to just to be a part of the solution space and really kind of unlock the data in a way that it can help drive to better care.
This sounds like the beginning of something super juicy and amazing. Where do you plan to take things from here?
Yeah, great question. And like Misha, I think was starting to tee this up, which is I think we should like level set maybe a bit. Focus areas, this product is, I think, a big step forward, right? Relative to the experience that a member has logging into like their run-of-the-mill payer website, the ability to confidently search for and filter to psychiatrists with experience in childhood autism for your kid is valuable today. I do want to emphasize, like, I don't think this is the end of the journey. As Misha was saying, it's the start of the journey. That like we're all kind of in together, kind of like rowing in the same direction. You know, we and the behavioral health industry and the healthcare industry have a long way to go. A few like ways in which I could see this evolving. Mm-hmm. You know, one is kind of tactical and sort of mundane, perhaps, which is like as the industry evolves, the way that our product is set up, like our product will evolve too. We are not waiting for some doctor to update their profile because their practice has changed. We'll see that change in the data and we'll summarize it algorithmically, like systematically. We're not waiting for like Congress to convene or like a new version of like the DSM to come out or something like that for us to start to draw like new connections and categories for like topics of care that you can attach to doctors' profiles. And I think like that's one of the benefits of this approach of like pairing like clinical insight with machine learning. I think another way in which this can evolve is something that Misha was touching on earlier, which is, you know, we're surfacing this like very like functional data right now. We want to start to move in this direction of like, I think we were kind of referring to as cultural competency. So, you know, we know that in behavioral health, especially, but true generally, that, you know, the patient's comfort with the provider is very, very important. And sometimes there's like language barriers. There's questions about, you know, my experience as, you know, an LGBTQ person, or do you know my experience as a woman? Do you know my experience as an immigrant? And those kinds of factors, I think, people are realizing are increasingly important in the behavioral health space in particular. So that's a space that we want to start to like explore and understand how to surface. And I think the last one is in the spirit of continuous learning, like one of the ways in which like Ribbon is like well set up generally is to learn from every time that somebody uses our directory, right? Like every time that somebody makes a referral, every time somebody searches for a provider, you know, we learn a little bit algorithmically, and being able to ingest that information makes us like continuously smarter about exactly which words people are using to search for a given term, exactly like how people are searching for a given doctor or a given type of provider. And I think that's a way in which, you know, we envision this kind of continuing to evolve.
There's so much more I want to ask you about this, but I can't believe we're already running out of time. So let me ask each of you, if I can, one more question. Where do you see the future of data for providers going?
I think if I tie this back to our mission, really trying to make every care decision high quality, cost effective, and convenient, the future of provider data should just be open and accessible and democratized and collaborative and additive. We are building a foundation, but we really want to make it grow on its own. We want to find the partners that are going to help make this data stronger, who are going to help make this easier to consume, and are constantly looking to help power their workflows, but then also have them help us learn and iterate and create these aspects that can then be used across the industry. So that's where we say is just continue to be transparent, and transparent and additive on itself.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Misha. We were talking like a second ago about like that feedback loop, and I think this question like permits a little bit of like armchair leaning back maybe, but I think the institutions in healthcare have learned like really well how to talk to each other, right? Like this taxonomy space is a good example. It's like, how do payers talk to regulators about their network? How do like academic medical societies talk to like medical schools about the types of specialty options that are available? Like it's like institutions talking to each other. Institutions are just now like learning as part of like this consumerism push and like trying to engage patients, like how to talk to people. And I think focus areas is maybe like a first step in that direction of like building a language, but it's, you know, it's just in our little corner of trying to find the right provider. But I think, you know, I think that's a very productive direction. And I think the reverse is also true, right? Like having institutions learn how to listen to people. In my corner of the world provider performance. There's a lot of like institutional metrics, like bundled payments and that sort of thing. But I think we're learning the value of like listening to patients and like hearing their reported outcomes and that sort of thing, and being able to ingest that sort of like, so institutions talking to people needs to be, I think, the name of the game.
If I could actually add one more thing here, I think too often we hear that provider data is a problem, and we hear a lot of this about a lot of different aspects of the healthcare industry. But I think the future of this is that this just should not be a problem anymore. This should be just out of a toolbox of easy to use and grab provider data, and like that's what we see the future of this being. We would like to solve ourselves out of the industry, no problem, very easy to navigate. That's where we're hoping to go.
Totally agree.
It's incredible to see this great work that you're doing to really transform care for individuals through quality provider data. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. This was fun.